Things I wanted to mention that I forgot, but then, one is that Peyton is going to be reporting. When is it, Peyton?
August 2nd.
August 2nd. That's not long. And then Colin is going to report August 17th. Let's keep those two young men. Let's keep all of our people in mind that are putting their lives on the line for all of our safeties. Let's keep that in mind. Let's remember that. So we've been looking at the book of Ephesians, and one of the things we've seen over and over in Ephesians is that Paul emphasized certain points. He talked about how we should love each other and love our neighbors over and over. He talked about the importance of the unity of the congregation and the people and the Christian walk. And he talked about that unity and the necessity of it over and over. He also prayed. He started with prayer. He prayed in the middle, and then at the end, what does he do? He says, y'all pray for me, y'all pray for each other, y'all pray for the saints the world over. So we see all those moments. He also talks about walk. Walk in love. Walk in the light. Walk in a manner worthy of your calling. And those are some of the things that we saw in Ephesians. Those are not new concepts. Today we're going to be looking at one of David's prayers in Psalms. Psalm 25. It's a psalm of David. And we'll see again that it is a prayer. Just as Paul was praying, David is praying. And it is also talking about the path, the way. Now Paul talked about the walk. Be worthy of that walk. And David's going to be talking, Lord, lead me in your way. Lead me in your path. One of the things that we see in those, both with David and with Paul, is that the walk with God, the life with God is not just a mental agreement on Sunday, but it is a way of life. Now we're only going to read the first 10 verses of Psalm 25, 1 through 10. It's a little longer than that, but we're just going to be in the first part. But if you'll turn with me to Psalm 25, we will begin reading. To you, O Lord, I lift up my soul. O my God, in you I trust. Let me not be put to shame. Let not my enemies exult over me. Indeed, none who wait for you shall be put to shame. They shall be shamed who are wantonly treacherous. Make me to know your ways, O Lord. Teach me your paths. Lead me in your truth and teach me. For you are the God of my salvation. For you I wait all the day long. Remember your mercy, O Lord, and your steadfast love, for they have been from of old. Remember not the sins of my youth or my transgressions. According to your steadfast love, remember me, for the sake of your goodness, O Lord. Good and upright is the Lord. Therefore he instructs sinners in the way. He leads the humble in what is right, and teaches the humble his way. All the paths of the Lord are steadfast love and faithfulness for those who keep his covenant and his testimonies. As we look at David's prayer here, we don't have a lot of context. Sometimes we'll see a psalm and we can figure out what part of David's life is going on here. We don't see that here. We know that he has enemies after him. That doesn't narrate a whole lot for David, does it? That he had enemies a lot of times. Whether that's Saul chasing him, or whether that's the Philistines chasing him, or whether that's where he's in the middle of a civil war with the descendants of Saul trying to be the king of Israel, or whether that's his son, Absalom, who's chased him out of Jerusalem, and there he is. But he has many enemies, but we don't know exactly where this comes from or the setting. But we see that David is praying to the Lord. Let me ask you this. When we read that prayer, is David relying upon his own goodness for that prayer? That would be hard to do, wouldn't it? Because David had many problems. Sometimes he might have been an adulterer, a murderer, he might have been lots of bad things, a liar. But he's not relying upon that, is he? He said, I am a sinner, Lord. I am here at your goodness. He puts his faith not in his own self, but in the goodness of God. And I think that's something to remember. Sometimes we have the idea that I'm not good enough to pray. That why would the Lord listen to me when I have all these problems, when I failed so many times? And yet when we see David here, he goes to the Lord and he says, yes, don't remember the sins of my youth. Don't remember me and my transgressions. Remember me in your love, Lord. It's the love of God that he's relying on, not himself. And I think that's something for us to remember. It's because when we have problems, and we all do, we have all fallen short just like David has. And we go to the Lord because of his goodness, not because of ours. And we want him to remember us in that way. When we see here, remember your mercy, O Lord, and your steadfast love, for they have been from of old. Remember your mercy, your steadfast love, not mine, but yours. Let me put my faith in you, not my faith in myself. This idea of putting our faith in the Lord and his goodness is not unique to this psalm, it's in others. Remember not the sins of my youth, or my transgressions, according to your steadfast love. Remember me. For the sake of your goodness, O Lord. For the sake of your goodness. Not for the sake of my goodness. That's not what David is saying. But for the sake of your goodness. We see other psalms where the psalmist will say, He, God, does not deal with us according to our sins, nor repay us according to our iniquities. For as high as the heavens are above the earth, so great is his steadfast love towards those who fear him. As far as the east is from the west, so far does he remove our transgressions from us. As a father shows compassion to his children, so the Lord shows compassion to those who fear him. So we see this consistent refrain in the Psalms. Let's put our faith in the Lord. Let's follow him. Let's follow his ways, and he will teach us. As we see here in this one, as a father shows compassion to his children. Last Sunday morning in Sunday school, one of the things we talked about was our vision of God. And we all have a vision of God. And there are many aspects to that. But sometimes I will say is I don't always have the vision of God as a father who shows compassion to his children. I'm not doubting that. Don't get me wrong. I'm not doubting that. That's in there. But usually when I think of God, as I usually think of a sterner God. Just in my mind, it's just the vision of maybe the God up there judging us. And that's part of it. But that's not the vision that we have here. And that's not the vision that we have in that Psalm 25, is it? You know, one of the things is we have different translations of the Bible. And there was a preacher named Eugene Peterson. And he did I don't know if it's a translation, it's not exactly the right word, but he has daughters. That he took the entire Bible, and he was a Hebrew scholar and a Greek scholar, and he rewrote the Bible in his language. And he's not trying to say this is an exact translation. He's not trying to say that. He says, I took the Bible and I wrote it in my language that I thought my children would be able to understand. And sometimes I really like what he has to say. It's called The Message. I know we've heard of The Message. But in here, he's talking, this is still the ESV, that David is saying that not only has he been a sinner, not only has he had troubles, but he is lonely and afflicted. Turn to me and be gracious to me, for I am lonely and afflicted. And we know many people who are lonely and afflicted and are isolated. You know, Tony gave me a blog post a couple weeks ago. And it was in response to some of the shootings that we've had. Y'all heard us talking earlier before services that Kelly with DPS had put on a training for officers to be trained how to go into a school building looking for a shooter. And we know that happens. And we know sometimes that we're glad the training's going on because we want to be confident in that. But this blog post that Tony gave me was from a young man. And his mother had asked him, why are so many of these shooters that are doing these mass murders young men? And of course there's many answers to that. And I'm not trying to solve that equation. But this young man said, well, one of the things is that they are isolated. So often they are isolated from the rest of the world. They are on the internet and they spend their time watching mass murder events, that they get caught up in that, and they're completely isolated from the rest of the world. And I think there's a lot to that. is isolation. And sometimes we need to understand that. Do not get me wrong, I'm not trying to excuse them by any means. But I also want us to recognize that sometimes we need to do something also. It's not just we want to react once it's over. But we see here in Psalm 25, and this is the message, that we have this, take me by the hand and lead me down the path of truth. You are my Savior, aren't you? That's the thing I liked about this translation. Take me by the hand. And if we have a vision of God that I want us to have, it's of God taking us by the hand and leading us. Take me by the hand and lead me. And when we're talking about people that may be isolated, and we are, whether they are a mass shooter or whether they are just our neighbor, in that isolation, take me by the hand. And we know that this is talking to God as taking me by the hand, but is there anyone that we need to take by the hand, that we may need to reach out to in their isolation, whether that's going to result in something horrible or whether that just might result in them having a little bit better life? Take me by the hand. We have many, many examples in the Bible of Jesus going to someone who is isolated, who may be an outcast in their society, whether that's the woman at the well, or whether that's the prostitute washing his feet, whether that's the Zacchaeus as a tax collector that everyone hated, whether that's a leper who no one would touch, that Jesus would go touch. Another example that Jesus tells about of isolation. Do y'all remember the story of the two lost sons? Many times called the story of the parable of the prodigal son. But there are two sons in that story. One is the one that runs off, spends his father's inheritance, and wastes it, and then comes home. But the other son is the elder brother. And it says that he's been working out in the fields. This is in Luke 14. And he comes back to the house, and he hears this celebration going. And he won't go in. We have joy. We have a celebration. This is his home, and obviously something good is going on. People are celebrating. This is a good time. And he stands outside and won't go in. And he stands out there isolated from the people who love him, from his father, from his family, from his brother who's come home, and he will not go in. And he gets his father to come out and talk to him. And his father says, son, your brother who was dead has returned and is now alive. We had to celebrate. Now everything that I have is yours, because you've been with me always. And then the parable ends kind of right there. Jesus doesn't tell us what happens next. Have you ever wondered what happened next? Does the elder brother take his father's hand and they go back in together to celebrate with the little brother? Does he continue to stand out there isolated all alone saying, I'm not going in. I won't do it. Or does maybe 6 months later he gets reconciled to his brother? The Bible doesn't tell us that. A lot of times the Lord will tell us a story and not end it. He does that over and over. And one of the reasons he does that is for us to think, for us to use our imagination and to spend some time with that passage wondering, what happened next? What does this mean for me? But we have that example of isolation there in the Bible. That's just one. Another verse that we see down here a little bit later in the same chapter. It says, he gives rejects his hand and leads them step by step. We see over and over Jesus giving rejects his hand and leading them step by step. And there's something that we can learn from that. Because we've all been rejected at one time or another. And we all want to reach out for Jesus' hand, that he can lead us in the way we need to go. It's been hot this week. One of the things is this: the temperature made me think of an old song, an old Neil Diamond song. This may not be the title of it. Brother Love's Traveling Salvation Show. And it's a song about this traveling preacher who puts up tents, and he does tent revival all over. And one of the phrases in there, it is so still, it is so hot, I can hear myself sweat. I kind of could relate to that this week when it was 115 out there. I can hear myself sweat. But there's another part of that song where it gives a little bit of the preacher's sermon in the song. And when the preacher is preaching, Brother Love is preaching, it says that you take your one hand and you reach up to the Lord, because that's what He's there for, to take your hand. In your other hand, you reach down to your brother, because that's what this hand is for, that you can lift him up. There's a lot of theology in that song. Love God and love others. That's a lot of what we have to do. But what I want you to think about today, what I want you to consider, is there someone who needs to have your hand? Do you someone who you need to go and take by the hand? Someone that may be rejected. Someone who may be isolated. Someone who really wants someone to take them by the hand. And do you need to take the Lord's hand? Because the Lord is offering His hand for us to take. And we're talking about that. The elder brother and that celebration is going on, and the Father is sitting there, is saying, come on in. God's doing that to us. The Lord's doing that to us. We have the good life. We have the good life, and He is offering it to us. If we will just take His hand and go on in. Now, one of the things we have in this congregation is we have people that, and I'm blessed to have such people to be with and to be around. Because we will take one another's hand, and we will help one another. And we will overcome that isolation if it's there. Sometimes we may not know it. Sometimes we may need to know if there's something that you need that we are not providing. And we want to do that. If you need to reach your hand out for somebody to take it and give you support, we want to do that. On the other hand, if you need to take on the Lord's hand, we want to help you do that too. And if there's somebody out there that you know of who is isolated, someone out there who needs help, who needs your hand, we are encouraging you to do that also. To reach out to that person and offer your hand so that they can have the life that God wants them to have. That's our lesson today. Let's think about offering our hand to someone who needs it. And let's think about taking the Lord's hand, that He may lead us in the way, that He may lead us in the path. If you have any need, if you need to take on the Lord's hand, if you need to take on our hand, we want to do that as we stand and as we sing.